Asia Tonight.
Good Friday evening. I'm Otelia Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. China's top diplomat and Thailand's prime minister in a joint crackdown on scams and transnational crime during Wang Yi's second stop on his regional tour. The South Korean prosecutors are seeking a 30-year prison term for ex-President Yoon Suk Yeol, accusing him of sending drones into the north to stoke tensions and lay the groundwork for martial law. Japan says the Iran war could raise energy bills from June as fuel costs climb with the Strait of Hormuz effectively shut. Officials, though, say supplies are stable and no power saving is needed. Beijing rejects U.S. claims that Chinese entities are stealing American AI tech at scale, calling them groundless, even as Washington says it has evidence. And China's DeepSeek is back in the spotlight. A startup unveiling a new AI model with Huawei integration, touting sharply lower costs after shaking up the industry with a low-price rival to U.S. tech last year.
From flying cars to intelligent driving systems and fast-charging batteries, automakers from around the world are showing off their latest innovations here in Beijing. I'm Rebecca Mateo. Join me later this hour for insights from one of the world's largest auto shows as we unpack where the ultra-competitive auto industry is headed next.
Also in the bulletin, nuclear power's comeback remains on firm footing. 40 years after the worst civilian nuclear disaster in history. But look at what's driving the shift in attitudes. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has met with Thailand's Prime Minister Anutin Charnvirakul in Bangkok on his second stop of his Southeast Asia tour. Now, the leaders spoke on strengthening their country's strategic partnership and expanding cooperation, also agreeing to boost collaboration in fighting transnational crime and cyber scams. Mr. Wang earlier also met his Thai counterpart, Shihashak Bongkat-Kyaw, for discussions on regional issues. The Chinese top diplomat arrived in Thailand yesterday, following meetings with government ministers in Cambodia. And for more on this, we are joined now by CNA senior correspondent Tan Yu-Guan, live from Shanghai. Yu-Guan, tell us more about some of the key items being discussed during their talks.
The talks were mainly about three things: crime, regional stability, and the broader China-Thailand relationship. Now, Thai and Chinese readouts both say that both sides agree to deepen cooperation against transnational crime and cyber scams. And that's probably one of the most concrete outcomes from the meeting. Wang Yi expressed hope for better ties between Thailand and Cambodia after last year's clashes. And so this was not just a bilateral photo op. It was also about the security environment in mainland Southeast Asia. There's also a bigger strategic layer here. Both sides agree to elevate relations to a deeper, comprehensive strategic partnership by advancing a joint action plan. Now, it's worth noting that Chinese investment in Thailand has been rising as Chinese firms shift production into Southeast Asia. So Thailand is not just another stop on the map for Beijing's envoy. It's also one of China's most important political and economic partners in the region. And then there were the optics, which were unusually vivid in this particular visit. The Thai Prime Minister apparently served durian and bamboo sticky rice to the Chinese Foreign Minister. Durian is, of course, a great hit in China, and sticky rice is, especially Thai durians actually, and sticky rice is a reminder of the common culinary heritage that both sides share. After the talks, the Prime Minister, Anutin, even invited Wang Yi into his private electric vehicle, a BYD, and drove a Chinese-made BYD, and drove himself to lunch outside the government house. Now, that's the sort of moment that says a lot in one picture. It captures the fact that Chinese presence in Thailand is not just diplomatic, but also commercially visible, and increasingly tied to sectors like EVs. And for those who have serious conversations in a car, you will know how conducive the confines of a car can be for deeper conversations. So in a nutshell, They discussed scam networks, regional tensions, and deeper strategic cooperation. But the picture viewers remember may well be Anutin driving his BYD with Wang Yi on board, because it symbolizes how closely politics and economics are now intertwined in this relationship. Oteli?
Also, you got just looking forward to Wang Yi's Asian tour that will soon take him to Myanmar. What is he hoping to achieve there?
Now, in Myanmar, the priorities look somewhat hard-edged. Chinese official messaging says, before the trip, says that Beijing wants Myanmar to do three things in particular: protect Chinese personnel and projects, crack down harder on cross-border crime, and maintain stability along the China-Myanmar border. Those are very concrete interests, and they tell you this visit is not just symbolic. China wants a more manageable security environment at its doorstep. Now, and the timing matters a lot. Even though China and Myanmar have stayed in contact, this is still being seen as the first visit by a top Chinese official in years, and it comes at a politically sensitive moment with Myanmar's new government in place. That means that the visit carries weight beyond the official language of friendship and cooperation. It signals that Beijing wants to be visibly present and visibly influential at this next stage. And that is an inference, but it is strongly supported by China's own framing of Myanmar as being a key at the key stage, and by emphasizing the deepening so-called poke-foul friendship. That's a Burmese term meaning sibling or kinsfolk, used to describe the close brotherly relationship between China and Myanmar. It's worth noting that today the Chinese embassy in Thailand, despite that friendship, renewed a warning to Chinese citizens about being lured to the Thai-Myanmar border by fake job offers and then being forced into telecoms or online scam operations. It really goes to show you that when Wang Yi talks about cross-border crime and stability, this is not an abstract item. This is something that Beijing is treating as a very much a live issue affecting Chinese nationals right now. In a nutshell, Wang Yi is going to Myanmar to protect Chinese interests, push for more stable border, press harder on scam and cross-border crime networks, and signal that Beijing wants to stay central to whatever comes next there politically. Oteli?
Hey, thanks for that update. CNA senior correspondent Tan Yu-Guan, live from Shanghai. South Korean prosecutors are seeking a 30-year jail term for former President Yoon Suk Yeol on charges of aiding the enemy. Well, the case is alleging that Yoon ordered a drone dispatch in October 2024 into Pyongyang 3 times to drop propaganda leaflets. It's claiming that the move was done to fabricate wartime conditions ahead of his martial law imposition 2 months later. Now, the prosecution added that Yoon's efforts heighten tensions with North Korea, risk exposing sensitive military information, and undermine state security. Well, Yoon has denied the charges and has been serving a life sentence for insurrection since February. The South Korean court will rule on the case at a later date. The charges against Yoon come after current President Lee Jae-myung expressed regret to Pyongyang over a separate drone incursion in January. It prompted appreciation from Kim Yo-jong, the powerful sister of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. She called it a, quote, wise behavior. Mr. Lee has vowed to repair relations with North Korea and pledged to prevent a recurrence. Japan's government says consumers may feel the impact of the war in Iran in their energy bills as early as June. Trade Minister Rose Akazawa says that Japan's utility firms will likely pass on the cost of fuel import prices as the Strait of Hormuz remains effectively closed. Although Japan's electric utilities industry body says there is no need for residents to save electricity this summer, Chairman Nozomu Mori says that the nation has sufficiently diversified its fuel sources, adding that the energy industry will further reduce risk by revising contracts and securing alternative suppliers. The nation will release an additional 20 days' worth of oil reserves starting 1st of May. Japan began releasing its strategic stockpile on 16th of March to stretch its oil supply to last 50 days. Well, meantime, South Korea secured 74 million barrels of crude oil for the next month. That's equivalent to about 87% of its average monthly imports. The Blue House says the nation has reduced its reliance on Middle East crude imports. Seoul has diversified crude oil imports to 17 countries and has been using a stockpile swap system to stabilize supplies since the start of the month. Well, the country remains concerned over disruptions to its naphtha and helium supplies.
특히 현재 수급 상황뿐만 아니라 한 달 후, 석 달 후 상황을 예측하고 그에 따라 필요한 조치들을 선제적으로 준비하고 있습니다.
China has rejected an accusation by the U.S. that an Iranian-flagged ship American forces intercepted contained materials for Tehran. U.S. President Donald Trump, in a CNBC interview on Tuesday, called it, quote, a gift from China, but did not explicitly say what the contents on the vessel bound for Iran were for. Washington said that the ship had tried to evade its blockade and was fired upon. Beijing has called and dismissed those claims.
中方反对任何缺乏事实依据的指责和关联，国家间的正常国际贸易不应受到干扰和破坏。
U.S. President Donald Trump, meantime, remains optimistic of getting what he calls the best deal with Iran. He says he could reach an agreement with Iran right now, and though he was willing to wait for an opportunity to reach an everlasting one. The American leader has ruled out striking Iran with a nuclear weapon, despite previous threats to completely destroy its civilization.
Why would I use a nuclear weapon when we've totally, in a very conventional way, decimated them without it? No, I wouldn't use it.
Mr. Trump also insisted the U.S. has total control of the Strait of Hormuz, hours after he ordered a shoot-to-kill for any Iranian boats laying mines in a strategic waterway. U.S. Central Command reported that 33 ships had been turned around as part of its blockade on vessels leaving from or headed towards Iranian ports. Most of them were oil tankers. Now, we've got more insights on the war on Iran on our website, cna.asia, or our mobile app, including this analysis piece on the significance of Chinese President Xi Jinping breaking his silence on the conflict and what it means for China's stance. Beijing has refuted claims made by the White House that Chinese entities are stealing U.S. artificial intelligence technology on an industrial scale. Science and Technology Chief Michael Kretsios said that Washington has evidence that foreign entities, primarily China, are running distillation campaigns and warned that the U.S. will be taking action to protect American innovation.
美方有关说法毫无根据，是对中国人工智能产业发展成就的污蔑抹黑，中方对此坚决反对。我们敦促美方尊重事实，摒弃偏见，停止对华科技扼压，多做有利于两国科技交流与合作的事。
Mr. Kretsios says that tens of thousands of proxies and jailbreaking techniques are being used to extract American breakthroughs via distillation. That's the cheaper process of training smaller AI models using the output of larger ones. Oh, no foreign entities have been named as yet, but earlier this year, U.S. AI developer Anthropic and OpenAI had separately made accusations against Chinese firms of free riding on capabilities that they've developed, including DeepSeek, Moonshot AI, and Minimax. Japan says it will be setting up a task force to address cybersecurity risks in its financial systems. The decisions were made after a meeting between the country's financial agencies, cybersecurity office, as well as major banks. This all comes amid rising concerns from potential vulnerabilities tied to Anthropic's Mythos AI model. Experts have warned that Mythos is able to identify and exploit vulnerabilities in major operating systems and web browsers faster than humans can patch them. Well, that widening gap could mean more cyber attacks in critical sectors such as banking that often rely on decades-old hardware. Well, there's been no reported security breaches linked to Mythos so far, but Japan is seeking to take the risks seriously. Finance Minister Satsuki Katayama said that the increasing concerns represent a crisis already at hand, as a cyber attack, should it disrupt markets, could undermine confidence. Time now for a short break, but coming up on East Asia tonight, China bans exports of key materials to 7 companies linked to arms deals with Taiwan in a rare escalation involving Europe. And the IEA warns global LNG markets could stay tight through 2027 as the US-Iran war disrupts flows and damages key energy infrastructure. Hi there, glad you're spending your Friday evening with us in East Asia tonight. It is now time to get you up to speed with your business updates with Olivia Marzuki. So, Liv, we're hearing about China's latest DeepSeek, latest AI model. It sounds very interesting, but I'm sure that must be cranking up Beijing's tech rivalry with the U.S.
That's right. So this new Chinese LLM release is set to undercut American tech giants, boosting local ecosystem in China. Chinese AI startup DeepSeek has launched a preview of its highly anticipated V4 model, adapted to run on Huawei's chip technology. The move marks a shift away from DeepSeek's earlier reliance on NVIDIA chips and highlights China's push to build a more self-sufficient AI ecosystem. Huawei says its Ascend AI chips will fully support DeepSeek's latest V4 models. Meanwhile, chipmaker Hygon says its own AI chips are already fully configured, with DeepSeek V4 delivering what it calls industry-leading efficiency. DeepSeek says the Pro version of V4 beats other open-source models in world knowledge benchmarks, trailing only Google's closed-source Gemini Pro 3.1. The model also comes in a cheaper Flash version, although DeepSeek has not said when the final product will be released. The launch comes at a sensitive time. The White House has accused China of stealing U.S. AI intellectual property on an industrial scale, while DeepSeek has faced allegations over export controls and the use of proprietary U.S. models. Beijing has rejected what it calls baseless claims. For markets, the launch is already moving stocks shares of rival Chinese AI firms, Zhipu AI, formerly known as Knowledge Atlas, and Minimax. They fell sharply after V4 release as DeepSeek's low-cost, open-source strategy continues to reshape China's AI race. And China has imposed rare sanctions on European firms over arms-related links to Taiwan, banning exports of certain goods to 7 entities. Beijing says the companies, including Germany's Hensoldt and Belgium-based FN Browning, are now on its export control list. They're there for involvement in arms sales or cooperation with Taiwan. The move bars the export of so-called dual-use items, goods and technologies with both civilian and military uses, including materials used in drones and ships. China asking all related activities to be stopped immediately, although it stressed that the measures will not affect normal trade with Europe. There's been no immediate response from the EU or the firms involved. Taiwan, which China claims as its own territory, relies heavily on U.S. arms, while European countries have largely avoided major sales for decades. Beijing has previously sanctioned U.S. defense firms over weapon deals with the island. The International Energy Agency warns global supplies of liquefied natural gas, or LNG, are set to remain tight through to at least 2027. The IEA says damage to infrastructure and delays to new projects are pushing back a long-expected surge in supply by at least 2 years. Tehran's move to effectively close the Strait of Hormuz and its strike against energy facilities in the region have driven prices sharply higher. The conflict has already cut off nearly 20% of global LNG supply, with key producer Qatar among the hardest hit. Iranian strikes last month damaged about 17% of its liquefaction capacity, with repairs expected to take years. The IEA estimates a cumulative shortfall of around 120 billion cubic meters of LNG between 2026 and 2030. While new projects, largely led by the U.S., are still coming online, their impact will take time to materialize. Higher prices are already curbing demand, with several Asian economies switching fuels and introducing energy-saving measures. The IEA says Demand-side adjustment will be critical to stabilizing the global gas market. Now, the effective closure of the Hormuz Strait, pushing down Asia's imports of liquefied natural gas to their lowest level in nearly 6 years. Inbound shipments to Asia of LNG are projected to fall to just above 19 million metric tons, down from more than 20 million metric tons in March and the winter peak of 26 million in December. That's with Qatar exports to Asia, a major supplier, estimated at just 800,000 tons in April. It is a far cry from the 3-month average leading up to the Iran war at more than 6 million tons, which is about 88% of Qatar's total volume. The sharp drop in Qatari cargo has forced Asian buyers to adjust, and China has curbed its demand in response. China's LNG imports for April are forecast to reach their lowest in about 8 years to 3.36 million tons. The country has also been reselling cargoes as Chinese buyers take advantage of the spike in March. Exports out of China hit a record high, although they came down sharply this month. Japan's core inflation accelerated in March, meeting expectations as the war on Iran continues to raise concerns over energy prices. The core consumer price index there, excluding food, rose 1.8% on year in March, in line with forecasts, and that is the first increase in 5 months. Excluding fuel, inflation also eased, that's just slightly, from February. Japan has rolled out fuel subsidies to cushion the price pressures from the Middle East conflict. Now, the data comes ahead of the Bank of Japan's policy meeting next week, where rates are widely expected to stay on hold. After decades of deflation, Japan started seeing sustained price gains since 2022. Some analysts expect inflation to exceed BOJ's 2% target in the coming months as companies pass on the higher energy costs. Staying in Japan, the largest investment bank and brokerage firm, Nomura Holdings, has posted a record annual profit for the second year in a row, even as fourth quarter results missed analyst expectations. The company said it sees minimal impact to growth from the war on Iran. Net profit in the fourth quarter rose 3% from the year before to around $463 million. Full year profit in the same period was up around 6%, hitting an all-time high of close to $2.3 billion. Nomura says markets have been favorable for now, but various risks and factors remain. Its finance chief says the firm is largely unaffected by structural challenges stemming from the Middle East crisis over the mid to long term. Taiwan's TSMC shares jumped to a record high, lifting the broader TAIEX index. The stock surged 5% after authorities announced plans to ease fund investment limits. Taiwan's regulators looking to change a long-standing rule limiting how much funds can invest in a single stock. Under the proposed change, some local funds could raise their holdings from 10% up to 25% in major Taiwanese listed companies. The move is expected to channel more funds into TSMC, a heavyweight on the TAIEX. The old 10% cap had limited funds as TSMC shares surge on AI demand. The change could unlock more buying and help push the TAIEX towards 40,000, about a 6% gain from the current levels, according to JP Morgan. And that's all I have for you this Friday. Oteli, back to you.
Thanks so very much, Olivia. Enjoyed that business segment there. Okay, well, we're going to go for another break now, but coming up on East Asia tonight, we are going to take a drive to the world's biggest auto show in Beijing and check out who is taking the wheel in the intensely competitive industry. You're watching East Asia tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. China's top diplomat and Thailand's prime minister agreed to boost collaboration in fighting transnational crime and cyber scams as Wang Yi makes another stop on his Southeast Asian tour. South Korean prosecutors seek a 30-year jail term for former President Yoon Suk Yeol over his alleged role in sending drones to North Korea to create a pretext for a martial law declaration. And Beijing rejects U.S. claims that Chinese entities are stealing American AI tech at scale, calling them groundless, even as Washington says it has evidence. China's largest automakers and tech suppliers have gathered in Beijing for this year's auto show. More than 1,400 vehicles are being showcased at a venue spanning 50 football fields, underlining the sheer scale that its fast-evolving car market. Some 180 new models are also being unveiled as brands race to grab attention in one of the industry's largest events. For more on this, we go live to our correspondent, Rebecca Mateo, at the Beijing Auto Show. Rebecca, so break it all down for us. What are automakers showcasing at this year's auto show, and that is probably different from previous editions? And what does that tell us about where this industry is headed?
Right, Otelli. Actually, people are streaming out of the halls now because it's the end of the first media day here at the auto show. But just a couple of hours ago, those halls in front of me, they're packed with media and influencers from all over the world: South Korea, Africa, Italy, Sweden, and this really just goes on to show how much interest there is in the auto show and how closely watched this show is. And domestically, for once, this comes as China scales back on EV subsidies and also tax incentives. So car makers are no longer just competing on price. The battlefield has shifted to a competition on technology and innovation. And this was very visible on the ground as I was walking around. The spotlight is really on the use of AI in the next generation of EVs. So I saw a lot of robots, humanoids, and AI-powered cars. So to give you some examples, XPeng updated its AI model to allow drivers to give their cars commands on where to park. Its cameras can also help to navigate without mapping. And another tech company, Xiaomi, has an AI-powered system in cars that can help drivers to do to-do lists, make restaurant reservations, and even place coffee orders. So compared to the Beijing Auto Show in 2024, where the focus was largely on EVs, this year it is really about which of the Chinese companies can deliver smarter, more advanced cars at similar pricing. And this is also in line with China's push towards innovation and tech as the next driver of its economic growth. Now, several companies I spoke to also told me that they are working on producing their own AI chips that help to power their vehicles in the future. And this is also to hedge against supply chain uncertainty moving forward. Let's hear from one of these companies.
Compared to the previous third-party chips, we can have much higher utilization of the chip's computing power. So with the Turing chip as a core part of our physical AI offering, I think that powers our development into advanced driving technologies, humanoid robots, as well as flying cars.
Oh, Rebecca, some very impressive offerings at the auto show. But having said that, it's also taking place against the backdrop of the conflict in the Middle East, which has obviously pushed oil prices higher. In that sense, has that had an impact on EV sales in China?
Well, many Chinese automakers saw strong export performance in the recent months, driven by EV sales, and companies like Chery, BYD saw their exports grow, and state-owned enterprise GAC, Guangzhou Automobile Group, told me that they're seeing over 80% growth rate in exports in the first few months of this year, and demand mainly coming from Southeast Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Now, industry experts I spoke to also say that the Iran war has sort of opened opportunities for incremental sales, especially in countries with high petrol prices. And this focus on exports also comes as China's economy slows, with softer demand at home and intensifying competition as well on the ground. So we saw China's domestic passenger vehicle sales fell 17.4% year on year in the first quarter of this year, but exports are surging. So it hit 1.55 million units just in the first 2 months of this year. Now, EVs are driving this growth, as I've mentioned, and exports of EVs are up close to 90% in the first few months of this year. And so several auto car makers are really accelerating their export strategies. And I understand Xiaomi is looking at Europe for this. And Xiaomi CEO Lei Jun, in fact, hosted Spain's Prime Minister just a few days ago during his visit here in China. Now, meanwhile, autonomous driving company Pony AI told me that the war on Iran, however, has caused disruptions to exports. But overall, companies are looking to expand into overseas and into countries in Southeast Asia, for example. Let's hear from them.
Our exported vehicles have been delayed in arriving in the Middle East. But I think in the mid-term or even long run, it's changed the consumers' behavior and perception that there could be a disruption to oil and gas. But at the same time, the EV related, so all our autonomous driving vehicles are powered by EV.
我们在全球的这个零部件仓的布局、及时快速的服务响应这些方面的话，都在做全面的系统的布局，从而能够更好的能够满足全球各地用户的需求。
To unpack all this, I have here with me Tu Li, the founder and managing director of Sino Auto Insights. So Tu, it's nice to have you here. You have been talking to car suppliers and also automakers here, and you are a regular at auto shows across China and even around the world. So what stood out for you this year?
I think, you had mentioned the AI and the technology aspects. The first few shows after COVID, it was all about value and pricing, price wars. But now you're seeing the companies try to differentiate themselves and really lean into trying to be technology companies. You know, some of these OEMs have humanoids, as you had mentioned, chip design, silicon design. So they're really trying to differentiate themselves in a market where there's ultra competitive to get one extra consumer, especially when 2026 is probably going to be a down year for passenger vehicle sales in China.
And to coming back onto the topic about the ongoing Middle East tension that has driven fuel prices, how sustainable is this demand for EVs that's coming from overseas, and what strategies are you seeing these automakers adopt, given now it seems that the competition is shifting from domestic market to overseas market?
I think for the Chinese automakers, especially the ones focused on electric vehicles or clean energy vehicles, the Iran war couldn't have come at a better time for them, because there was some pressure to reduce exports from some of the foreign countries. But now with petrol prices going up in Europe, the UK, Latin America, you're likely going to see an invitation to ship more clean energy vehicles, more affordable, more efficient vehicles into those markets.
Right, and all this is happening amid softer domestic demand, right? Auto sales in China fell 20% in the first quarter of this year from a year earlier, and new energy vehicles also dropped around 24%. So several companies are turning to exports right now as a strategy, next growth strategy, right? So what does this mean for their strategy at home? How do you think the automakers will balance this sort of weak domestic demand as at the same time accelerating their export strategies?
So the successful Chinese OEMs will be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. They'll be able to focus on growing the domestic market because that's where their bread is buttered. And if they're able to increase sales in their domestic market, it allows them flexibility in the foreign markets and try to grab margin from those markets. Now, because of the cutthroat nature of the Chinese market and the cyclical nature that's 2-3x faster in China than it is in Europe and the United States, it's really going to be hard for one or two companies to consistently be on top. And we're seeing that as BYD has struggled over the last couple of quarters, and Geely and companies and other companies are catching up to them a little bit on the feature side and the value side.
And we chatted earlier that we are seeing more partnerships between Chinese automakers and foreign players. What is your read on this trend, and what does it mean for the automotive industry in China moving forward?
It's acknowledgement that specifically the Europeans can't play the technology game the way the Chinese can and some of the American companies can. And it's linchpin for the foreign entities and the foreign OEMs for the China market. Now, how will that bleed or react over into the European and the North American market? We have yet to see. But my thought is that it'll bifurcate a little bit with some restrictions on Chinese technology in Europe, specifically in North America as well. But the foreign legacies can't compete without Chinese partners in the China market, just because the Chinese consumers really demand that level of technology in their vehicles. That doesn't happen as much in the other foreign markets.
And we saw some foreign car makers here at the exhibition as well, right? You told me something interesting just now, and you saw the CEO of this foreign car maker. So what does that signal, actually?
It signals that the Chinese market has been the number one passenger vehicle market in the world since 2009, and it's getting larger still. So it's one of the few growing markets now. Again, the denominator is much larger now, so getting double-digit growth is going to be very, very difficult for the China market, but it's still linchpin for global automakers to be players in the China market. Otherwise, again, they lose the volume and they lose the flexibility.
And there's this huge push by automakers here to embed AI into EVs. So how big of a game changer is this from what you've seen today?
For the Chinese, it's a huge advantage because they're already going faster than most of the legacy automakers. And if the analog legacy automakers can incorporate technology quicker and more efficiently into their vehicles, then they're going to continue to struggle, not only being competitive in China, but in the rest of the world.
And I've actually heard from some companies that they are looking at mass production of some driverless vehicles and flying cars. What's your take on this? And actually, just how far are we from the reality of our roads filled with all these cars?
I think it'll be lumpy. I was just in San Francisco last week, and I couldn't. Every street I saw, there's a Waymo turning a corner or Waymo driving by. So I think China's going to, in certain cities, is going to embrace technology, robotaxis, much more than some of the lower tier cities. And I think also in Europe, there might be one or two cities that embrace. Cities like London, they're going to have Baidu, they're going to have Wave, which is a British robotaxi, and they're going to have Waymo. So it's going to be sooner rather than later, I think, for a lot of people. And in China, at least, there's also intelligent driving almost on every new passenger vehicle. So,
right, certainly a lot to look out for over the next few days of the Beijing Auto Show. That was Tu Li, founder and managing director of Sino Auto Insights. So, Telly.
I really enjoyed that interview. Thanks so much for your report, CNA correspondent Rebecca Mateo, live from Beijing. The US and the European Union are set to ink a preliminary deal on critical minerals later today. Well, the move, widely seen as part of a strategy to reduce reliance on Chinese firms. US State Secretary Marco Rubio will be meeting with EU Trade Commissioner Marcos Maros Sefcovic for a signing ceremony in Washington, D.C. Now, the Memorandum of Understanding could reportedly include measures that would favor non-Chinese suppliers, such as minimum price guarantees. Both Washington and Brussels are also said to be eyeing a multiple-country accord to create new critical mineral supply chains. The agreement would also mark a respite in tense US-EU relations, which have been strained since US President Donald Trump criticized them for not helping out on the war in Iran. Coming up on East Asia tonight, we examine how Chernobyl has reshaped the global nuclear energy landscape 40 years since the world's worst nuclear disaster. The nuclear disaster that terrified the world, Chernobyl, 40 years ago this Sunday. As the world reflects on what went wrong, the nuclear industry is on the verge of a renaissance, driven in part by rising demand for low-carbon power. But what's behind the shift, and do the risks that defined Chernobyl still hold? Well, it was a routine test gone wrong on April 1986 near the city of Pripyat in the former Soviet Union. Operators pushed Chernobyl's reactor 4 into unstable conditions, disabling key safety systems. Now, a design flaw turned a safety shutdown into a runaway power surge. Seconds later, explosions ripped the reactor open, blowing off its 2,000-ton top shield. Without a proper containment structure, the blast exposed the core directly to the air, spewing radioactive fallout across Europe. Now, despite the incident, nuclear power remains critical worldwide, even as Russia retains control over the Zaporizhzhia plant. Around half of Ukraine's electricity is still nuclear-powered. In Japan, 15 reactors have restarted since the 2011 Fukushima disaster, with more under review. Tokyo is also expanding global nuclear partnerships with countries like the US. Today, more than 400 nuclear reactors are operational in 31 countries, and around 70 reactors are under construction, one of the highest levels seen in decades, driven largely by growth in Asia, as demand rises for stable, low-carbon power. Now, the United States leads with 94 operable reactors, producing 30% of the world's nuclear power, with plans to quadruple capacity by mid-century. But China is catching up, and fast. It now has at least 60 reactors and dozens more under construction as it pushes to become the world's top nuclear energy producer. While nuclear power is making a comeback, it's not the same as before. Conventional nuclear plants used to be large, costly, and reliant on human control for safety. Today, small modular reactors are changing the game. They're self-regulating and assembled on site. Major upgrades since Chernobyl. Reactors now rely on passive safety systems that use gravity and circulation to automatically shut down and cool the reactor without human intervention. Simpler, fail-safe designs reduce the risk of overheating, while more resistant advanced fuels give operators more time to respond in emergencies. Now, some fuels can even retain radioactive materials at very high temperatures, preventing meltdown. Getting rid of radioactive waste sounds daunting, but the reality is more manageable. Experts say most of it, around 90% by volume, is low-level and makes up just 1% of total radioactivity. It's, if carefully managed, cooled, sealed in robust containers, and increasingly reprocessed into new fuel. But I have to say, safety concerns still remain. Past disasters have shown how human error and design flaws can lead to catastrophic failures, while improper disposal of spent fuel risks contaminating water supplies. The Fukushima disaster also highlighted the dangers of locating reactors in seismically active regions. And despite global agreements, nuclear materials continue to pose security risks. Now, most experts say the chance of another Chernobyl disaster happening are low, but with nuclear power plants being built at an unprecedented pace, oversight and regulation will be paramount to their safety. Now, my colleague Yasmin Yonkers spoke with Julia Cesar Trajano, research fellow at the Center for Non-Traditional Security Studies at RSIS earlier. And he tells us more of what the world can learn from Chernobyl about nuclear power, safety, and risk.
Well, the Chernobyl accident highlighted one key concept, and that is the concept of nuclear safety culture. So the Chernobyl accident is a combination of technical accidents, but also failure in human intervention. So one key factor, one key lesson from this Chernobyl accident is the importance of avoiding complacency and strengthening safety culture among the employees, regulators, and the management of a nuclear facility.
Well, that message has gone on to ring loud and clear. Still on this anniversary, Julius, it lands in a wartime context. It's hard to ignore that, whether in Ukraine or in Iran. How has that changed the way that we should think about nuclear risk today compared with the lessons traditionally drawn from Chernobyl about safety and such?
Yes, so nuclear accidents now will come from various complex factors. So it could come from natural events like a disaster, but it could also come from human-induced events like conflicts and wars. So what we've seen from Ukraine and even in the Middle East, that critical infrastructures are now not safe for being targeted by hostile parties. So it is important to bear in mind that the Chernobyl accident is a reminder to us that any threat to nuclear facility will be complex, much more complex. It's not just traditional, but it will also be more intense and more digitalized.
More digitalized. Okay, that's very interesting. Technologies are upping. We're seeing renewed interest in nuclear power again, due, of course, to the technology that's available. Not just that, it's also the energy insecurity today and the oil volatility. Julius, how should we understand what's driving this renewed momentum right now, and what risks need to be considered?
Okay, so nuclear energy is a direct response to threats to energy security and energy diversity of any country. So it's no longer just about reducing your greenhouse gas emissions, but it's more of strengthening your domestic sovereignty over your energy sources. And nuclear energy strengthens a country's position to secure its energy and electricity supply chain. So because uranium can come from various sources, and unlike oil and gas, which can be hijacked by any particular hostile enemy or hostile state, uranium can come from various geographical sources, and it can be stored for a long time by a country.
Well, let's talk about the story here in Asia, where it's very layered nuclear-wise. From Japan's experience with Fukushima, there's also the North Korea and security dimension. So how do you see these realities shaping regional considerations on safety, trust, and preparedness here closer to home?
So, for example, in Southeast Asia, there is a growing regional cooperation and regional conversation on the importance of nuclear safety and nuclear emergency preparedness and response. So countries, particularly here in Southeast Asia, recognize that any accidents or incidents in a nuclear facility will have a transboundary consequence. So it is important for countries in the region, Southeast Asia and the broader Asia-Pacific region, to have this conversation and have some kind of information sharing and capacity building cooperation to strengthen nuclear safety within nuclear facilities, and also to have a good platform for all these countries to cooperate in times of an emergency.
And on that, Julius, speaking of Singapore, which is studying nuclear ambitions, being small and densely populated here, what are some specific considerations that policymakers have to weigh that may be different from larger countries?
Yes, so one particular issue here is the siting of the nuclear facility, because Singapore is a very urban, highly dense city, and there's land scarcity is a key issue here. Unlike in other countries where you have vast spaces of lands where you can put up a nuclear facility, that's a different situation here in Singapore. So the small modular reactor can be a viable technology that Singapore can adapt, and I believe that Singapore is currently adopting a cautious but research-oriented position in analyzing what kind of reactor technology will be used in Singapore in the near future.
Well, we have more insight on what's motivating the change in attitudes towards atomic energy, including this CNA documentary on the nuclear revival. It's part of a series on the nuclear option, and you can catch that and other episodes on demand on the CNA Insider YouTube channel. And I hope you've enjoyed Friday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend.